covering everything that you need to know in talent experience.
People applying for new positions is like the cherry on top.
With the technology to attract talent.
Recruiters always know their best talent.
The AI just learns to use that information.
Inclusion efforts across the organization.
Tell me what it's like to work for through associate story.
Interviews with leaders in the industry. Talk about what's new in HR tech. What are the hot topics? We're here every week, folks. Weekly look at the latest and greatest topics in HR. Hey everyone, welcome to Talent Experience Live. We're here every Thursday. I'm super excited to be here. As I like to say, this is the greatest show on the internet. This is the place to be every single week if you are a recruiter, a sourcer, a talent marketer, or a talent manager. I'm your host, Tom Tates. I'm on the marketing team here at Phenom. If you're just joining us, we go live every Thursday, 12 p.m. Eastern, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. Follow us on your application of choice, subscribe, get notified so you never miss a beat. We love being here. We love it when you're here too. Talent Experience Live is proudly brought to you by the team at Phenom. Our purpose is to help 1 billion people find the right job. That is a true billion, not a typo. Our Talent Experience platform helps candidates find the right fit faster, employees evolve in their current role and beyond, recruiters achieve some of that next level productivity and efficiency, and managers build better teams with data, analytics, and automation. All of this is powered by super slick AI and machine learning. Head on over to phenom.com if you want to learn more. If you're interested, that's the place to be. Shout out, as always, our video producer, Justin Devitt. He is in studio today. He is in the studio. He's pulling the levers. He's pressing the buttons. He's making it happen. Shout out to our executive producer, Patri Chupa. She plans our programming. She plans all the content. She connects with our guests, writes our amazing headlines and titles. The list goes on and on. Patri is making it happen too. As always, I want to know who you are. I want to know who you are, where you're from, what you do. Let's get loose. This is Thursday, noon, Talent Experience Live. We've got an amazing show lined up, and let's just get cracking. I want to know where you're tuning in from. I always like to say I work for the internet. It's amazing. I get to connect with people all across the globe, so it's great to know where you're tuning in from, what platform you're tuning in from. And one of the amazing things that happens here on Talent Experience Live is people connect with each other. And that's awesome, right? That's an awesome byproduct of putting on the show each and every week. People are connecting with each other in the chat. People are networking. You're with your people. You're with your peers, right? So get in there, get in the chat. Let us know who you are. We got a shout out in the chat here. Shout out to the real star, Justin Devitt. I couldn't agree more. Justin Devitt is making it happen. Listen, this is really, really awkward. Unfortunately, I can't stick around. I actually have HR banging on my door, right? HR is banging on my door, and they're saying, Tom, you forgot to do your part in the annual review process, and it's due today. Actually, it was due yesterday, so you better make it happen. This is super awkward. I hate to do this to everyone, but it's okay because it ties into this tricky topic that we want to cover. Every year, managers and employees, they come together to perform this awkward dance, right? This dreaded obligation, the annual performance review. And it's happening right now here for Team Phenom. We've got Heather in the chat. Heather from Charlotte, North Carolina, welcome. Patri, of course, from Southern New Jersey. If you want to suggest a topic or a speaker, reach out to me or Patri on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Christina from Northern New Jersey. But as I said, guys, I got to go. I got to leave, right? I have to go get this done. We've all been through it. HR is knocking on everyone's door. You get the Slack messages, the Microsoft Teams messages, PDFs with the timelines. Those are my favorite. You get the PDF and it's like, employees must get this done by this date. And then your manager must get this done by this date. And it's all laid out there for you. And if you miss a date, that's when you start getting those personal notes or those emails, BCC emails, where it's a handful of people. Check the box. Hey, you're late. Where's your review? It's unfortunate, right? But listen, fortunately for you, unfortunate for me, but fortunate for you because we have two amazing co-hosts that are going to join us today. And we're going to welcome to the show JD, VP of Marketing here at Phenom, and my colleague, Jen Thomas. Let's bring them on. JD and Jen, how are you?
Hey, Tom, we're doing great. Tom,
hey, listen, thanks for bailing me out today. I got a lot of stuff to do. I got this whole form to fill out and all these questions, and it's got to be in the right format and everything. So I really appreciate you guys jumping on and taking over the episode today.
I know all about it.
Tom, you have us in the green room absolutely cracking up. It is hysterical. We've all seen the notifications from HR and others, and I think they're obviously well intended, and they are good reminders to try to keep us on track. But sometimes we just scratch our heads and go, "Yeah, I get it, I know, but when am I going to fit that in?" So
it has to happen.
It does have to happen.
So you guys are in studio today, which is very exciting. I'm hoping to come in within the next week or two. So hopefully, one of the future TXLs, I'll be appreciating that super awesome video quality and getting loose with you guys in the studio. I'm excited about that. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys. And if you need me, call me back. I'll be in the green room.
Yeah, you can certainly multitask and work on that review while you're doing this, right? Because how else is it going to get done, really?
That's right.
Hey, I'll get it done. I'll check the box. But you know what? It's got to be meaningful, right? And I'm sure you guys will cover that in the next hour. So I'll turn it over to you guys. Have a great show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Tom. Jen, this is an interesting title we've picked for this show, right? It was avoiding the annual disappointment review.
Yes.
A bit negative, no?
It could be perceived negatively. Yes.
Yeah, I think, but
it's also something I think people could possibly relate to as well, depending on reviews that they've received in the past.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And so why don't we start with some memorable reviews, right? And so I guess I'll start first. You go next. And if I have another one to add, I'll add another one. So, what Jen and I want to talk about today, and we have some experts we're bringing on the show, not right now just yet, but we're going to bring Megan on the show, who is on our HR team and is helping employees and managers carry out performance reviews and make them absolutely stellar performance reviews. So we're actually going to get not opinions, but some expert advice. And then we're going to bring Jesus on at the very end of the show to talk about technology. How is technology, including AI technology, how is it happening to support some of this process? Not the entire review process, but in particular, career pathing and mentoring, which is often talked about as part of the annual review.
It should be.
Yeah, it should be. You want to go first, or you want me to go first with story time?
You go first.
All right.
I'll go, and then if you have another,
I'll have another for sure. So let me start my first one. Justin, you can go straight ahead. So for the first, kind of memorable review for me, and I'm going to go way back. I'm going to go back to maybe my second or third year out of college. I was working technical support role, on call 24/7, working my tail off for 2 or 3 years now. And I thought I was an amazing performer. I thought I was the ultimate perfect employee. So I walked into the annual review expecting a very, very large increase in salary. Now at the time, I was making a good salary. This is going back many, many years. So I'll discuss it. I was probably around $30,000 mark in salary. And I expected something. I don't even remember what, but I expected a very large jump, a meaningful jump. And so I had a good relationship with the manager at the time. Like, we were a close-knit team. It was a startup company. So we all knew each other. We knew each other's families. We knew a lot about each other, spent a lot of time with each other. I walk into the annual review playing this, I don't even the song name, but playing the song that goes, money, 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 money. Sorry for the audience. I'm not a singer.
You really played that song.
I did. I
going into your review.
I remember on my Windows laptop at the time, hitting the play button as I was walking into her door. If Karen is listening, Karen will remember that moment. I'm sure it's one of the most awkward reviews.
Okay. Yeah, that would be it.
But my expectation was I'm going to have an amazing review and I'm going to be blessed with the acknowledgement of that review of a large increase in salary. And you know what I walked out with? I walked out with a 3 out of 3 in the rating scale. So I was in fact confident in what I had performed over the last 12 months.
That's good. Yeah, that was not a miss. Yeah,
it was not a miss. I nailed it. You could only get 3 in one category and 3 in the other. I got 3 in both categories. Right, I nailed that. And I think my pay increase was 1.5%. And making $30,000, $30,000 and getting 1.5% didn't feel like it validated my expectation. It was definitely a disappointment, an annual disappointment review. What about you?
So, before my job at Phenom, I had been freelancing for about 10 years when I had my children. Before that, I think I had 2, but again, they were with very small companies. It was a very informal process. So I think my most memorable review was at Phenom.
Okay.
Last year. You have to be an employee for a certain amount of time before you get your annual review. And just what stood out to me was the thought process behind it, that this wasn't something that, this was about my performance, what I thought about my job that I was doing, where I wanted to go. And again, I hate to bring it up, but salary. For me, I had started at a point where I wasn't due for an annual review after the first 6 months, or I don't know where I fell into the bracket. I couldn't have my annual review until I had actually been an employee for, I think, over a year. So for me, salary was definitely one of the things that I wanted to visit.
Overall, positive review, negative review?
Yeah, no, it was positive. So our review was, I'm trying to think back. You had to talk about how you exemplified or lived out the core values. At Phenom, we have specific core values: CRISP, which is curiosity, responsibility, intensity, self-confidence, and positive thinking. And within each of those, you had to talk about how you were doing and where you think you fell on the spectrum and what you contributed in that year. So I did do that. But I remember thinking that since I had not yet had a discussion about salary and if that would increase, if it wouldn't, that was something that was really concerning to me based on other things going on in my life. And so I was nervous about how that would all play out.
Yeah. We're going to get into more of that soon, I believe. Like, you and I are going to tee this up, and we're going to dissect that in a little more detail, because I think it's extremely interesting. And again, what we're swapping some stories here is so you can relate, right? And from an audience perspective, if you've had a great review, we think that's awesome. Right. We think that's very positive. If you can associate and connect with a more disappointing or negative review, we think there's a lot of people there. And we're just trying to show there's multiple perspectives here of what this means. I'll share one other quick story, and then we'll keep talking. So my next quick story is talking about a review I had much later in my career. And in that later in the career, I remember distinctly the manager I was having the review with said, "Hey, you've got some great things going on, and you have some things that I think we should talk about." And I said, "Okay, yeah, of course. What is it?" And the items that she mentioned that I should think about or talk about, I remember listening to and thinking, how is that negative? Like, you're giving me compliments. These aren't things to work on. These are things to celebrate. And
what were they?
Well, they were my style of leadership. They were how I work with other people in the team and collaborate. But a style. They were hinting towards my style of doing so.
Okay.
And that's fair. So they were hinting towards my style of doing so. And what I shared with them on that style of doing so is, I said, what you're mentioning to me feels like they are leadership characteristics in their executive characteristics. So you're mentioning to me as these are negatives. These are things I should work on. But to me, these are what exemplify leadership in executives. And she said, yes, you're right. She laughed, not laughed at me. She chuckled, and I'm not naming names. She chuckled and said, yeah, I think you're right. And I was left confused. How is it possible I'm showing leadership characteristics, executive type characteristics, and these are things I need to work on now that you're penalizing me for in this review? That was one part of the review. The second part of the review is there's ranking and ratings, number system like anyone. And she had asked me, do I agree or disagree with each one of the ratings and rankings? And I disagreed with like 2 or 3 of them. And then I said, well, does it actually matter if I disagree and we go back and forth and argue over each of these points? Or should I just accept this? And we came to the conclusion, without arguing, that I should just accept these numbers for what they are. Because in my world as an employee, it was meaningless to me and the review felt empty. So if that was the case, I pretty much, okay, whatever you want to submit, I'm fine with. Meaning I don't need to try to argue to raise a number for the sake of raising a number. That's not how I operate. Okay, I respect your opinion. As a leader and manager of her, I respected her opinion. If she thought I was rated in a 3 instead of a 5, sure. Okay. There's no need to argue about that. There was no need. So anyway, that was two reviews. I've personally had a lot of disappointing annual reviews. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this entire session today, is because I think there's a lot of people who can identify with either a negative or a disappointing annual review. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I did have the opposite experience, but that said, so we've talked about how you've received a review, how I've received a review. But what about when you have to actually give the review?
Well, I have breaking news for you, Jen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have breaking news. So your manager, as you know, is out on maternity. So guess who gets to do your review this year? Me. I get to do your review this year. So we can do your review live on, we can do Jen Thomas's review live on TXL right now. This would be a first ever. So are you ready for your review?
I think I'm ready, yes. But as part of the process, I know, because I was contacted by our HR department numerous times, that I needed to perform a self-assessment. And I know that I am definitely behind on that. I have not done my own self-assessment. So therefore, I don't think you can really evaluate me if I have not submitted that.
It sounds like you and Tom are in the same boat. Like, we won't bring Tom back on, but Tom, you're in the green room right now.
Backing me up that you did not do yours either.
Apparently Tom is in the same boat. Well, this is interesting. So when were reviews due?
I think they were due last week. I think I'm over a week.
And you keep getting notified by HR just like Tom?
I was notified once, and I still have yet to do it. It's on my list, and I know it's a priority, and it's not something that I don't like being late at things. I don't like not doing something that I'm supposed to do. That's not part of my personality. So it is bothering me that I have not done it.
Why haven't you done it?
I have not done it because, as you know, we are growing as a team. My direct manager is on maternity leave. Yes. We have hired multiple new people on board. I consider it my job to make sure that they are not being thrown to the wolves and have some idea of what the plan is for them and, their future at Phenom, as well as just, the day-to-day responsibilities of making sure that content is going at the door and that it's high quality and it's what it needs to be. So
I don't know, Jen, as a manager and leader, I kind of feel like you need to work on your time management skills. And maybe we should be talking about that in your annual review, if we ever get to do your annual review.
Yes. I think Asana and having a project management tool that I know is approved will certainly help. But until that day, until everybody's on board, I think it is juggling a lot of stuff and then trying to figure out what are the priorities, what can't we miss, what can't not happen. And it's not that I don't value my annual review and not think that it's an important part of the process, but the fact that in my direct manager's absence, you and I talk frequently about what I'm doing, where I'm doing a great job, where I could improve, where there's areas of growth. So because I know that we're both on the same page pretty much from that perspective, I think of the annual review as more of a formality at this point. And when there's other things that I know have to get done for the impact of the business, I choose to prioritize that over this.
You're the perfect employee. For everyone listening, Jen prioritizes the business in the team and the deliverables over her own personal interest of a review.
So when I don't get a salary increase or a title bump or anything, I know it's my own
That's
fault.
correct. That's correct. We'll cover that in the annual performance
Yes.
review as well. So I think the reason why Jen and I are having a good time over this is because we both have agreed when we were thinking about this show, we both agreed that it's one of those things where it's really difficult for both the employee, many times difficult for the employee and difficult for the manager to handle the annual performance review. And a lot of it comes down to priorities and balancing the priority of taking the time that it takes to do really quality reviews on both the employee's part as well as the manager's part. And it's not an easy thing to set time aside. I will share right now that my feelings about the annual disappointment review. And I feel it sets so much expectation around really a moment in time, a once in 12-month moment in time that means too much. There's too much on the line. It sets up an individual or individuals for disappointment. And I think we're going to get into today, as we bring on an expert later, we're going to get into, how to make the best of an annual review, but then what we should be doing throughout the year. You had mentioned, Jen, you had mentioned like you feel connected, you know what you're doing right. You feel like you know what you need to improve on. But none of that talked about salary. So we're going to get into that too, how to have that conversation. But I feel that there's too much emphasis on a single moment in time. It leads to most people or many people being disappointed versus a really awesome checkpoint event. The second thing is why I do like annual reviews, and I really like them for this one reason. I feel like they are a great checkpoint that you can start fresh, that you can stop doing what wasn't working, start doing what is working. You can have a focus, looking at an entire 6 to 12 months time of a body of work and say, over this time, this is what I am proud of. This is what I am not proud of. Here's where I want to improve. Here is where I don't feel like I need to spend more time reviewing. That is an amazing feeling that both leaders as well as employees can go through. And having a dedicated moment in time to do that, although not required, in my opinion, is amazing and should be taken advantage of. It's why I like the beginning of a week. Mondays are not disappointing to me. Mondays are a fresh start. It's why I like the beginning of the month. It's a fresh start. The beginning of a year, it's a fresh start. It's a good excuse and reason to do things differently and improve yourself. And that's why I do like annual reviews. Outside of that, I tend to think they're set up for a bigger disappointment. And anyway, that's what I think.
That's all valid. And I know we're going to bring on an expert, as you mentioned, but I do want to address, like, so far we've really talked about the experience of annual reviews from an employee's perspective. But as a manager, you're also required to be giving reviews.
Yes, that's true.
And so curious as to your perspective on giving these performance reviews and whether you enjoy that process, and how you feel about it. Again, is it just a formality? I know that you have one-on-ones with the people who directly report to you on a weekly basis. So a lot of what you may be covering in, say, an annual review, you're talking about continually. But just wanted to hear your thoughts on that before we bring on our expert.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So I think my thoughts on this is, and I just mentioned why I really like annual reviews. I mentioned why I think many of them lead to disappointment. It's because we're saving the most important things to talk about, important to the employee, and we're saving them for a moment in time that's going to lead to a disappointment. But I struggle with the same time problem, whether someone wants to tell me I have a time management problem, whether someone wants to tell me I have a priority problem. It could be all of the above as a leader. I struggle thinking, well, how do I put in the amount of time required to give someone an amazing annual review that they deserve and carve out that time? And having several direct reports as well as some other folks now that I have to cover for, like I could be doing between 13 and 17 annual reviews this year. Like if I really put in the time to prepare, that's probably over 2 hours per individual. That's a lot of time.
And I'm just clarifying, this isn't like you having a conversation, getting on a call and talking about things. This is written content that you have to write down and think about.
Yes.
And then communicate clearly. That's going to be read by them.
Yes.
So that's
it's
a lift.
It's a lift, and it's all the above. And in particular, one of the challenges for that is, quite frankly, is I'm lazy. As a leader and a manager, I'm lazy. I don't want to put that much effort into it. You know what I'd rather do? I'd rather just have a conversation, and I'd rather talk to someone candidly. So what I try to do consciously is I try to, as you pointed out, I try to do that as a leader throughout the year, throughout a given period of time. It's not something that because I personally had so many disappointing annual reviews, and I continue to have them. I don't think they'll ever go away. Maybe I have a bad expectation. I refuse, and I try not to have employees that I lead have disappointing reviews. It's almost like I overcompensate. And so I love to use the time that on one-on-ones or unscheduled time that I'm just grabbing people and having conversations to help them navigate their career, to, quite frankly, talk about salary. I think there's a dirty secret that we haven't talked about. Justin, can you go to the camera with Jen? Because there's a dirty secret I want to talk about. And that is, as a leader and manager, I probably have had the salary discussion in my own mind months before the annual review. Months before the annual review. So you had mentioned, Jen, you had a positive annual review previously.
Yeah.
And in salary, you mentioned salary. I didn't mention salary. Was salary talked about prior to that review?
No.
It was not talked about. So you walked into that review.
And I'll say it was something that for me, it was very important to address. It was something that was a priority. So I knew that going into that annual review, I was going to have to address salary, where I was, where I wanted to be, why I thought I should be where I wanted to be. And that can be a very uncomfortable, awkward, hard conversation when you've never had it before. And if you don't know what range you're playing with. At the time, I had been freelancing for 10 years, but prior to that, I had been a senior editor. So, I had all of that context. I knew what I was making.
Mm-hmm.
I knew the contributions I was making, but I also knew that I had taken 10 years off. And I was raising my children freelancing, it's not the same as being in a full-time position.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is you walked into an annual review. You walked into it with salary being, for that particular year, salary being very important for you to discuss because it had not been discussed leading up to the review.
Yes.
But what was discussed, you mentioned, was how you're doing,
Yes.
what you're not doing, like
where I want to grow.
Yes. So what we're pointing out is, as an employee, right? As an employee, what's happening is you're building up this moment, just like I fell into over and over again. I'm building up this moment that the annual review is the moment where I'm going to make a stand.
Yeah, I'm going to either get what I think I deserve or I'm not. And that's what can lead to the disappointment or the tears, as the SHRM articles say. I think, I don't know, it's like 50-something% of millennials end up leaving these review processes in tears. So
yes, and there's no need to that. We're pointing that out on this show. There's no need. So we can keep unpacking this because it shouldn't happen that way. The dirty secret I wanted to talk about is that even salary should be talked about all the
ahead of time. Yeah.
Much ahead of time. If you're not talking about salary 6 months before, salary reviews happen in your company, 6 months before those reviews actually officially happen in your company, then you're not preparing yourself for a successful review as an employee. And as a manager, there's two ends of this. It's employees and managers.
Because I did my research. I knew what my, title was and what other people are making.
But
Like,
you
yeah,
didn't share that in advance.
No.
And your manager at
No,
the time
I didn't.
did not mention and talk about that in advance either, right? So this is an area we learned we can improve on, because it could have set up for an extremely big moment of disappointment. So let's learn more tips. Let's bring Megan on, Justin. Let's learn more tips on how we avoid these disappointing moments.
Hi.
Megan, welcome to
Hi, Megan.
TXL.
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here, having fun behind the scenes, listening to your chat about this daunting performance review process.
Hopefully we're not making it awkward, because what we try to do at TXL is talk about some of these taboo topics, and we try to bring light into the fact that we are all employees and managers and leaders. We're all struggling with a lot of these things, and we can all relate to it. So can you help us, like, just give a little background about yourself, and like Jen and I know, but what have you been really trying to do over the last couple months here?
Sure. So I am relatively new to Phenom, but not new to the learning and development world. I have spent about 15 years developing content for onboarding and ongoing development. And I am so passionate about helping people become better learners. And really, I find joy when people are successful in their own roles. So that's what brings me here to Phenom. And over the last couple of months, I've been working on a bunch of different trainings, but right now we've really just been, as you guys have said, rounding out our end of the year performance review process. And part of that from our HR side is providing employees as well as managers training opportunities to come and listen and learn about what this process should really be like. So you don't have the build up to that big moment that's going to be disappointing. That's one of my biggest, I think, faux pas with end of the year performance reviews from a manager standpoint. If you have an employee walking in and they're caught off guard and it's disappointing, it's not a failure on the employee's end. That's your job as a manager, to have that constant feedback. And I think, everybody builds these up, and I agree with you, to be so big and that moment in time, like you said. But I think it's really more about the mindset and how you're approaching end of the years. So, as a manager, you should know those goods, you should know those bads, you should know the areas for growth. And like Jen said, communicating that on a regular cadence, but really taking the opportunity at the end of the year to level set about career pathing and skills, and where do your employees really see themselves, and gathering that great insight as managers that we can really share what we've learned or what other people have helped us learn to help them get to the next step, and really changing that stigma surrounding the whole end of the year review process. So just some thoughts as I listen to you guys behind the scenes, but all these points that you guys are bringing up are really, really great. So
Megan, let us interject and start putting you in the hot seat.
Sure.
Right. We want to put you in a hot seat for the viewers who can relate to the tips hopefully you can give them. And that is, Jen and I both acknowledged we're struggling from a time perspective. And I didn't always struggle in every company setting time to do either the self review or the manager review portion. But many of the companies I've worked for, many of them, I've been in this time constraint struggle of how much time to really put forth for this. Do you have any tips for employees and or managers who feel like the task feels overbearing to do, even though it's not really overbearing? It's just about carving that time out. But what tips do you have to help us?
So I think from an employee and a manager standpoint, that this process is going to be coming up. I think the biggest thing I could say is stay away from procrastination. But the other thing that I would say is start preparing well ahead of time. Do not wait until that end of the year performance review cycle opens. Start taking notes and jotting things down that are important and that you want to cover and have conversations about before the time comes where you have to sit down and formally write things. I think that we are so lucky here that we use a wonderful HR software, Lattice, that when you're doing your one-on-ones and feedback is being provided and updates are being provided, you can, when you get to the end of the year, you can pull all of that great information directly into the end of the year, and it's made to really help it be an easy process. But I think, like so many of us, waiting until the last minute, and I think as managers, we tend to wait the longest on the ones we know are going to be, the biggest struggle, or the conversation you don't want to have with an employee, even if it's conversations that you've already had with this employee. I do think to break it down in smaller bits and pieces. So, especially from a manager perspective, depending on how many employees you have, setting aside time on your calendar each day so it's not as overwhelming. You're not getting to the end of the cycle saying, oh my gosh, I have 13 reviews today. If you do one a day and you spend 2 hours a day on it, and again, if you're kind of doing all that prep work ahead of time and having those notes ready to go on your employees, it's really going to make it a lot easier and not so overwhelming. So just setting aside time. I think from an employee perspective, again, not waiting till the last minute. Now you've waited, the pressure's on, you're not thinking clearly. You're like, let me just get this done. You hit the submit button and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot to mention like 5 things that are really, really important. Taking that time to go in and just start it, and even come back and think about it. You don't have to do the whole thing at once. You don't have to sit down for hours and just really think about everything that you've done exceptionally well over the past year. A fair review is also thinking about the things, not that you just do well, but the things that you need and could do better. There's times where you look back on a project or an action, a task, and you say, it didn't go as well as I thought it could have. And, but I will do that differently next time. So and again, if you're having this regular conversations and regular feedback, these are all things that are going to help as you get to the end of the year too.
Megan, that's super helpful. I have a couple of other questions for you.
Sure.
What do you think about separating the conversation of salary and performance? Those are two things that seem to be intertwined, but as JD's one story reflected, he did get his 3 out of 3 for performance, but his salary increase didn't seem to match that. So what are your thoughts as to whether that should be a separate conversation or it should be part of this?
That is an amazing question.
We thought long and hard about that one.
Yes, clearly. I think as employees, we're also passionate, or hopefully we're also passionate about the work that we did. And like you said earlier, we really want that to be reflected in whatever salary increase we're going to get. And sometimes we don't always feel that our expectations are met. I think there's pros and cons to both ways. I think kind of taking the compensation out of it really allows you to focus on those career growth opportunities and not be have your employees be so zoned in on, okay, but what is the dollar amount I'm getting? You want it to be a really productive conversation with them. And again, we all got to be managers and where we were because of what we've done and what people have helped us learn. And being able to turn around and do that for somebody else is really what you want the focus to be on. But I think you have to communicate that ahead of time too. It's the setting the expectations before they even walk into that end of the year conversation with you about, is compensation going to be discussed at that time, or is it going to be a separate conversation? I do think it can take some of the weight off of it, but I mean, ultimately you have to have a conversation about compensation. So, maybe that's where the dread can go over to, instead of actually having a really positive end of the year discussion and level setting. Again, employees just want to know they did a good job, and is that going to be reflected to what they think it should be. But to JD's point and what he said before, having those conversations before you get to the end of the year as well. And if you have a concern about salary or anything like that, it should be brought up. I hate when people wait until the end of the year reviews and then they come in with like this laundry list of things, and you're like, well, why haven't you said anything until now? We can have these conversations, but I think somebody wrote in about just being transparent and honest, and that's really what it's all about. But I definitely, I would lean more towards having separate conversations, because you can really focus on that career growth and what you can do as a manager to support that employee, and then have a separate conversation about compensation.
Awesome. I think I want to ask you, do you feel that there's a positive trend in the entire working world that we're moving towards what Jen and I have others have said, even in the chat, Bambi, for example, who mentioned that every one-on-one is an annual review. Do you sense the positive momentum going in a leadership style across the board to having these consistent conversations versus the reliance, what has historically been a reliance on an annual moment in time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for anybody in the HR world, if you do any research into where the world is headed, it is something that, it seems a little of an outdated practice. While many companies still use this, and it is that kind of measure of success, if you will, whether on an employee level or a company level. But I do think, and especially in today's market, that constant feedback is definitely more where the pull is going to be and is headed. I think Jen even said earlier too about these millennials walking out of their end of the year reviews just crying. Again,
Yeah, there are numerous articles about it, so it definitely caught my attention.
Yeah, and that can all be avoided if you're just having conversations regularly with these employees and coaching them, as any manager should be. If you see something, say something. You can't just expect them to know that they aren't doing things right, or job performance expectations aren't being met, and just waiting until you get to the end of the year to say something. So if you were really coaching them, mentoring them, and having regular conversations, you can avoid the crying millennials at the end of those performance review conversations.
Also, the concept of recency bias, which, as I'm researching this whole topic, came across some articles talking about, if you had a stellar end of the year, say you were part of a project and you did really well, you knocked it out of the park, but maybe the beginning of the year, you didn't do so great. How does that affect your review versus somebody who might have had some projects that they were responsible for the beginning of the year, but then closer to when they had their review, maybe they ran into some roadblocks, they weren't able to deliver the way they wanted to deliver. And so if you're having those conversations consistently and all of that's kind of being documented, then I would think that it would reduce that whole concept of recency bias when it comes to the review at the end.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked this question, because we actually covered this during our training with our employees about recency bias. And going back to that fair review is not that you've done a stellar job in the last few weeks, the last few months, but it's doing a stellar job all year long. And like you said, if you have an employee who wasn't doing so hot at the beginning of the year, but has kind of, just fallen into their role and really has started to succeed, you have to think about that. A fair review does look at the whole year. Again, whatever system that you're looking at, or if you're using any project management tool to track your projects and how those went, going back to emails like we do, using Lattice to see, where you were really at the beginning of the year. That's really, really important. But I think being able to also have that open conversation with an employee too. And I know even on the employee side, that was a lot of questions that we received as well. You know, how do I'm struggling with how to score myself on my self evaluation. And one of the things that we said, you know, you really have to be reflective of the whole entire year. That's great that you're doing well now, but, you know, take that um, into consideration. I think the other thing that employees and managers both need to consider as well is the role that the employee is in. Maybe you have one of those high performers on your team who's really getting ready to take the next step. You know, they could be, you know, at the top of the level at this performance review because they're in their role, they're executing on their role, and they're really doing a wonderful job. And now you're going to promote them and they're in this new role and they have to learn. And so they may get to the end of the next year and they are not necessarily, might not be at the top tier anymore because you're looking at the role they're in and the job expectations and what they're doing, and they're still learning. You know, and expectations are, it's going to take at least a year to really sink into that role, get the hang of it, and know everything you need to do to really succeed. So that's really important too. I think as employees, you know, like you guys were talking before, you know, you walk out of here and you're like, oh my gosh, I wasn't a 5 in every category. You know, a fair review is really a mix of scores and feedback as well too. And again, unless you're that super top performer and you're getting ready to take that next step into a bigger role where, again, there's going to be room for growth, and that will be reflective in your next review.
Awesome. Do you have any area that you're passionate in that we didn't ask you about, or do you think can be really helpful to employees and managers that are listening right now?
So, two things come to my mind. The first thing is I think it's really important when you get to your end of the review, end of the year conversation, when it's coming to a close. I think it's really important to recap things that you've talked about, and especially as the employee to say, so if I understand you correctly, you want to see X, Y, and Z, and writing down goals. This way, you and your manager are walking out of your review, and there's no miscommunication about what was discussed and what expectations are moving forward. You're both aligned, you're on the same page, and it really just, again, like you said, sets that stage for starting new for the new year, which is wonderful. I think as an employee too, it's very important. This is your time. This is your conversation. It's not for an employee just to come in and sit and listen to a supervisor, you know, kind of recap the year for them. Take lead as an employee. Say, you know, let me tell you a little bit about what I wrote in my self-evaluation and where I'm at and what I'm thinking and where I want to go as far as my career and what I really need from you to be able to take those next steps in my career. And I think from a manager standpoint, you know, again, people are very passionate surrounding the end of the year process. And I think it's really important to choose your words with care and really think about that before heading into that conversation. And as an employee, be reflective. You know, I think we get so, well, I've done an amazing job, and no, but just kind of taking into what others are seeing in you and what they see from a different perspective. And it can really help you grow in the long run. So I think that would be probably some of my biggest feedback to have a phenomenal performance review.
Awesome. Megan, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. If anyone has follow-up questions, put them in the chat. I'm sure Megan would love to help us answer those questions post this live session. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
So there's some comments that have come in. Justin, if we could, let's go to Bambi's comment and then Jamila's comment. So Bambi's saying, for consideration, how does remote work create additional distance in performance reviews? You know, this is probably a question that a lot of managers are going to struggle with, that maybe they weren't in remote environments before. Mm-hmm. I think we should remember, though, Bambi, that many leaders and managers have been doing remote management of employees well before the pandemic started. And it would be no different now. So my personal opinion is nothing changes much. I think the reviews, the process, the feedback, the one-on-ones should all be done the same as if someone is in person and someone is remote. So for example, if I'm personally going to find 20 minutes to walk around the block, walk around the building with someone, I'm going to find 20 minutes to do that on the phone with someone, even though they're not personally next to me. And I think employees, my point to that statement is employees should have that same expectation. That's what should be expected. So I don't think so. And then Justin Jamila has a comment. Ratings are so subjective. It's especially so when it comes to combining compensation for a bonus. Yes, very true. I agree. I've been on the losing end of numbers that I mentioned, Jen. I'm not going to argue with my manager. Whatever number you think I am, I am. What is it going to get me as an employee to arguing a 3 to a 4 or a 4 to a 5? Maybe if I'm not being seen for the value I bring, maybe this is not the right environment for me. Maybe that's a sign. Maybe you have a manager, maybe a leader that maybe you need to go to a different team. It's the right company, wrong team.
What do you think about negotiation though? Because that's something that some people are very comfortable doing. And then for other people, they may not be used to negotiating salary. It might be something that is outside of their wheelhouse and they may feel like they're being underpaid. And what's the advice there on how they address that? Maybe it is a good fit, but they need to be able to advocate for themselves.
So related to bonus, I think you have less leverage to negotiate. I just personally think you do. I think you have less. As someone from HR profession would have a better insight than me. I don't have the insight there. From a salaried conversation, what I'm advocating for is that employees and managers should be discussing salary outside of the annual review process, period. They should, if you're not discussing it 6 months before the annual review happens, you're behind.
And what is so I'm curious now, since I've never had to give one of these reviews, but I will need to. How would I approach that topic? How would I bring up salary? So are you comfortable with what you're making right now? How does that happen?
So this is out of my area of expertise, and it's probably a different TXL episode. I'm not a compensation specialist. We can do a TXL, future TXL, and do a compensation specialist. Yeah. What advice I would give now, though, to not avoid the question, is managers and leaders should be leading with the best interest of their employees in mind.
Sure.
There should not be an exception there. A leader's job is not to pay a worker, someone under them, the least amount of money possible for the business. Right. I don't think that's true. This is a personal opinion, not an opinion, that should be for everybody. So with that in mind, now it's a conversation between the value someone feels they're being compensated for the work they're doing, and in line with a competitive pay scale across similar fashions and functions across your industries. And that's where I'm not prepped for the conversation. That's where a compensation and benefits specialist needs to help. They need to help employees as much as they need to help managers. But what I'm advocating for is don't leave the salary conversation to the annual review, or you're likely going to be disappointed. You're likely going to be disappointed almost every time. Certain people aren't, and that's good and that's healthy, but almost. So don't save compensation for the moment in time. What I'm saying is it's too late. It's too late if you wait till that moment. You have to have a leader and a manager you can talk to. If you're not comfortable, Jen, let's say, I'm not saying you are not. Let's say you're not comfortable or you don't know how to have it. I think that is an awesome conversation with a leader. Hey, so-and-so. I'd like to talk to you about compensation, but I really am not, it's not a comfortable topic for me. Is that something you can help me with? You've broached it as an employee and you started doing your own personal responsibility for the moment, which is it's important to you. So make sure your leader, your manager knows it's important to you. Now you better have a really good leader and mentor and manager to now facilitate that conversation and not ignore it. Right. So I think, anyone listening, if you can connect with that and feel that, then I think that's wonderful. But I have actually a wild statement to make. my wild statement to make right now is outside of a performance review. If you are today working for a leader or manager who refuses to have a conversation outside of an annual performance review, meaning they tell you, no, we'll discuss that in your review, and they avoid conversation. If they're not giving you at a minimum monthly, regular, consistent feedback, it can be weekly, but in some environments, weekly is not needed or necessary. But consistent review, consistent time and conversation doesn't even need to be formally scheduled. If they're not giving that to you, you should consider leaving that company, or at least working for a different leader or manager. Because if that conversation is not consistently happening, how can you possibly understand your career path? How can you possibly understand what the compensation is going to be for yourself as you grow, learn, and take on more responsibility? It's practically impossible. And so that might be a bold statement. I wouldn't just send out all your resumes and leave today. My advice would be, as an employee, start having those conversations with a manager and make them have them with you. And if they refuse to, now you really have to question the environment, the company, and the team you're working for. I don't see how you can be successful in your role by not having the support of a great leader that doesn't save all this stuff for the annual disappointment review, unfortunately. That's my 2 cents.
It's a great opinion.
I don't know if it's a great opinion, but it certainly is an opinion. And it's formed by a lot of disappointing reviews over the years. And I try personally to not operate that in that function. But I also see the world changing. And I see the best performance coming out of employees that have consistent feedback. I've yet to talk to an employee personally that says, I don't like that you shared that with me. That makes me uncomfortable because you're pointing out things I could work on to get better. I've never heard that before. I've never heard it. I've heard a disagreement that they think they're pretty good at that. And guess what? That's a great conversation to have too.
Sure.
That's a great conversation to have too. But I've yet to hear an employee who is upset that you gave positive and challenging or improvement advice. Not once have I run into that situation. How about you?
No, I mean, I think that everybody has a different opinion as to feedback and how well they receive it, but it's something that I've gotten very used to working at Phenom, you know, and I certainly find all feedback valuable. I think it's the way that we grow and how we get from point A to point B.
Yes. How about technology? Should we talk?
Yeah.
Do we have Jesus? Jesus is in the program. Let's bring him on.
So a lot of these topics that we've been talking about, you know, when you have your annual performance review and you're talking about where you are, where you want to go, that naturally leads into things like career pathing. And do you need a mentor? Do you need somebody to really be advocating for you, sponsoring you, and helping you figure out, you know, whether it's a course that you need to take or multiple courses, or what you need to do. And so there are ways that technology can help there. And we've got the employee experience expert here to help us out with that.
Jesus, come on, man. Awesome. Jesus, how are you?
What's up, guys?
Hey.
How are you?
We're doing great. Jesus, you are no stranger to TXL. We brought you in on the last piece of this segment because it's a critical piece. It's not a long piece. So those who got time constraints, right, we're going to hit this quick. And that is, no matter how good or bad of a review, if you're having consistent conversations with your leaders or managers about your career path or where you should be getting mentorship from, that's one thing. But how does technology complement, especially AI technology, how does it complement career pathing in mentorship?
I think it's all about connecting the dots. And I think even on some previous TXL shows, we talked about it, right? It's great to show things or have those discussions with employees, but help them close the gap, right? Or help them close the loop, like give them actions they can take, right? It's fine if I get told that, you know, my cooking sucks, right? But what do I do to actually improve it? I would probably read cooking books and things like that. There may be even recommendations, you know, in terms of, here's a great book, here's a great article, or here's a great recipe to try. I think that's where AI really comes into play. It's taking that context of your performance reviews, taking the context of your aspirations and goals, and making it actionable. I think as long as we have something that we can action against, a lot of us will improve just our regular day-to-day activities, or even just take time out to learn and be better, be more experts at our current role. And I think that's really the role of AI in this case.
Yeah. So your cooking is not that good, is you're saying, but maybe it's not the recipe, right? Maybe it's the oven, right? Like maybe it's the oven, right? Maybe you're actually okay, and there's some other factor. I think without regular conversation, that actually never gets discovered.
Right.
You never get to the root cause to be able to fix what the problem actually is. And we're not saying employees have problems. We're not making that association. We're just using this example that some things are directly in control of someone if it's pointed out to them and they're coached and mentored. And some things, it's like the cause or the challenge needs to be surfaced. And that's likely not serviced in one conversation. So your cooking's not good. Here's a recipe. Guess what? You followed the recipe to the T. You gave it back to me, and I went, "Oh my God, I can't eat this." What's going on? So maybe I'll just give you another recipe. Is that going to solve the problem?
No, not at all.
So we have to talk about here. Like it's everything. Like the last 2 times you cooked on this recipe, it actually was way overdone. Like way overdone. Like I was eating leather. That's what it felt like. But did you leave it in for the 30 minutes that the recipe said? Maybe. I don't know what you did. Maybe.
Yeah.
So it was the oven that's overcooking your food, not what you did. And so when we have these conversations and we start saying, hey, I can get to ask you questions now. So when you went through the recipe and the cooking process, did you leave it in for 30 minutes? Yes, you did. Right. Did you cook it at 425 or 350? 350, that was the perfect temperature. I'm not sure why it came out this way. Maybe we need to look at something else, another factor that we're not considering. Right. How about trying to cook it at 300 degrees, even though the recipe says 325? Now, all of a sudden, we made improvements together. And I think that's what you're saying. You're connecting the dots.
Yeah.
And technology, along with human interaction with a good leader and employee. Employees are being educated, managers are being educated, and together with technology, it's leading to meaningful changes.
Absolutely. And I'll add even one more thing there too. I know we heard a lot about, manager to employee feedback, but I think feedback goes both ways, right? And that's something I do even with my reports. Is I don't just want to dish out feedback, right? I could improve myself, right? We all learn every day, right? I think that's us as humans. We're always striving to learn more, be better. And, I think it goes both ways, whether it's AI recommending things to you or recommending people, mentors, career paths. It may not be the end of it all, right? You might still need that human in the loop feedback too, to understand whether, this department is right for me, or what else could I improve on? I think both of those are great points.
Jesus, give me give Jen and I actually a concrete example about how AI is suggesting mentors. Like how is that concept even there?
So I think it starts really with understanding the employee. Every unique employee might have a different aspiration, might have a different set of goals. Understanding their desires, their aspirations, where they see themselves down the road, really starts evolving that people-to-people matching, right? Understanding the mentor as well. What can they coach you on? Can they be your onboarding buddy? We do that here at Phenom. We do a lot of onboarding buddies. Even if it's not necessarily a professional coaching, it might be more about awareness or just bringing you and getting you acclimated with the organization. Mentoring is a great tool because it's really connecting where you want to go or where you see yourself in, or sometimes even where you can self-identify struggles or areas you want to improve on. I think that's where AI really starts making or connecting those dots, is just really understanding the employee and the mentor, understanding what they can bring and what they're looking for.
So if we were to spend one more minute into the AI puzzle, what you're mentioning, you talked about career pathing, you talked about mentorship. How does it fit into a broader employee experience?
I think it all fits in the sense of the 6 points that Tom and I had recently on one of our webinars, which is it's not enough to just give employees 1,000 open requisitions, 2,000 open requisitions. It's not enough to tell them, here's what you're missing, or here's what we require for this role in order for you to be successful in it. It's making it actionable, right? Transparency, but actionability. And I think that's how all of this fits into that bigger picture. It's here's 5,000 jobs, but out of that, there's 3 that are perfect for you. These other 5 might not necessarily be the right choice today, but here's what you can do to do it tomorrow, right? Connecting all of those into a single equation creates, a full employee experience.
That's awesome. And maybe we'll bring you on another program that you can actually show us this. But since we're not showing it today, like you can go, anyone listening can go to phenom.com, request a demo. And Jesus, maybe we'll even offer you personally to give demos to folks who want to see this in action. Jesus is awesome to talk about these scenarios where he can actually show you the employee experience and how it is in a technology perspective. And then taking the mystery out of actually artificial intelligence, where AI plays a part in the entire employee experience, not just career pathing and mentoring, which we got into today. Jesus, really appreciate you joining us. Thanks for being part of this episode.
Thanks.
Always happy to be here.
Great. So let's wind this down. But let's make some strong points.
Yep.
We're not saying that the annual performance review or the annual disappointment review is trash. No, we're not saying that at all. What we're saying is, and what I think we've reflected on, is many times it's a disappointment to someone because it has been built over time to be this gigantic, significant moment that really is not and should not be the case. Right. And it should be replaced by many consistent, ongoing conversations around someone's professional growth via skills, experience, focus areas, personal soft skill development, as well as, wait for it, salary. And that should be an ongoing discussion. And we've agreed that the annual performance review is a good checkpoint. It's a good checkpoint to reflect over an entire body of work, a 6-12 month period body of work, that you can say consistent behavior is this.
Right.
Here's how you have made improvements. Here's how you continue, the person continues to work on the skills that in the aspects of their role that was mentioned in these ongoing discussions. Here's what the expectation is related to performance and pay and where someone's at. And here's what you're getting, over the next, significant period of time. And, use that to have a moment to start doing things differently and to stop doing things.
And I think if that's addressed, and maybe that's something that, we even here can look at, if we address that, saying, all of your one-on-ones, you should be thinking about that through this lens that, we will have an annual performance review where all of this information comes together. Because we do have these talks, we have them on a weekly basis. But if somebody's aware that they should be thinking about this in terms of the fact that all of these elements will come together for the big one,
yes,
it won't be such a heavy lift and people won't procrastinate because they'll actually have information that they can refer back to.
Well, I hope Tom used this time that we gave him back from not hosting TXL to work on his review. I didn't get the notification in Slack that it was complete yet, so I'm really not sure that.
And you didn't get the notification that mine is now suddenly complete.
So we still have these problems that we need to work through related to priorities and time management, of course. But I think, Jen, we're going to survive another annual performance review, and hopefully not too many of us will be disappointed this time around.
Here's hoping.
Thanks for joining us on TXL. Come back next week. You can have Tom all to yourself. Jen and I will not be here. So we appreciate everyone for listening and supporting the show. And Tom, thank you very much as well.
Thanks for joining, everyone.